Hello and welcome everyone. Today I'm very excited for this video because I'm going to share 10 things with you that I learned either from colleagues who are much better than me or from YouTube videos or doing courses or reading things online, reading blogs, technical articles, etc. that made me a better developer in last 3 to 4 years. I'll try to share 10 things with you that will not only hopefully make you a better developer, but I think you and your colleagues and your work life will really appreciate anything that you learn in this video. And if you learn anything new, just give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, show your love in the comments, and now let's get coding. So this is the first thing. This all of us know. For someone who's seeing this for the first time, I'll quickly glance over it. So we are basically printing the node version. This is irrelevant. Then this is an async code in which we are fetching something from an API, right? This is an await, and then we are getting JSON value, and finally we are printing it out. So let's quickly run this and see if this works. There you go. We got the JSON value and we are using the JSON placeholder for this, and we are just finally just printing the result and nothing fancy. So this everyone knows. Now let's make things a little more complicated. One of the biggest mistake that developers make is writing async code in a for loop. Let's see how it goes. Instead of getting the to-dos, let's get the users. And finally just print it out. This is index for file, so let's print the right one. So there we go, we got a list of users. I think it returns 10 users by default, or like limit of 10. So we have 10 users. Now, what if for each and every user, we wanted to get more information, right? So this is where a for loop can come into the picture. So let's write a for loop now. We can say for, and there you go. So this should help us print all the users one by one. Instead of get to-dos, we'll say get users, right? Let's try to run this and see if it still works. Hopefully it should. And there you go. It still works the same way, but we are now printing one user at a time. So this works. Right now, we just have a for loop. We fetch the list of users and there's no async await written inside the for loop. Now let's introduce that. Let's go to JSON placeholder and see what we can do with users. Let's see the guide. So we can get posts. We can get posts, a single post, for example, post with ID 1, post with ID 2, etc. And we can do the same thing for comments, etc., etc. So let's say we want to loop over all the users and get the list of posts for all the users, right? So how would you do that? Let's assume we wanted to fetch the list of posts by each user. So what would we do? We would do something like this. So I would say constant response equals await, use the fetch, right? And inside the fetch, I would just write the URL. And for this user, we are going for, I would use the backticks so that I can do string interpolation. This would help me write variables inside, which is pretty helpful. I really like it. And I can write user ID, which is I, right? Or I can just write users I.id. This would also work as long as the user ID is valid. And in the end, we want to get the posts for each user. So technically we could do this, right? And then I could print all the responses over here. Let's see if this works. And there you go. Looks like it works, but I just have to convert it to JSON. So let's do that as well. We'll convert the response into a JSON. And there you go. We have the list of posts by each and every user. And if you really want to make things clearer, I could simply add this. Here you go. This should help us segregate posts of each user. So below this line, we have all the posts for user ID 10. As you can see, above this, user ID 9, then separation, then user ID 8, user ID 7. So this works. We get the idea, right? So this works. But what's the problem? That's the biggest thing we need to learn, right? The biggest problem is you are not utilizing parallelism by JavaScript, because if you notice in this for loop, there are many asynchronous calls. In this instance, there are 10 asynchronous calls made inside the for loop, but there's no parallelism. And none of these calls are dependent on each other. It's not like we have to make the first call first and then wait for the second user before we can go to the third user, right? There's no dependencies. There's no parallelism, and we can and we should introduce parallelism. So let's see how we can improve this. So I would not remove this code so that we can still refer this if we want. Rather, I would write the better one below it. And you tell me if you already knew this. If you did, great. But if not, let us know in the comment below. First of all, I would create an array of the responses that I'm going to get. Next, instead of making the await inside the for loop, so basically actually waiting for the loop, actually waiting for the API to resolve, what we would now do is remove all of that. And in the end, I would just say responses.push. And there you go. So what am I doing over here? Right now, I have created an array of responses, and I'm just pushing the fetch inside the array, right? So what is it going to do? This fetch call actually returns us a promise. So right now, I'm creating an array of promises. So once this loop is done, I'll have 10 promises, so 10 API calls inside an array. And then I would use something like await, and I'll say promises, promise dot all. I'll just pass the responses array inside it. What this would do is promise.all, if you don't know already, it would make all the API calls for us, in this case, parallelly. And once all of them are resolved successfully, it would give us the result, right? So it would still work. If I write node index.js, it still works, everything worked, but the only thing is we did not print anything, right? That's why it seems like nothing happened. But actually we did make many API calls, and let's see them as well. So what I would do is I would say constant real responses, and obviously you can name the variable much better than I can, right? But let's not focus on that right now. And in the end, I would do console.log, and I would say, so let's see what happens when I run this. So I'll do console.log, and I'll print all the real responses, and let's see if this works. So node index.js, and there you go. We still have all the API responses, but now we did it in much faster way. You can actually write console statements to compare the time and see how much time both of them takes. And this one, believe me, would be much faster. And this is a great thing that I learned by making mistakes. Someone from my team told me that this is not the best way to do it. You can parallelize things, and you can make use of promise.all features that JavaScript and TypeScript already provide us. So why not use them if they exist, right? So this is the first thing. Now I'm going to tell you 9 more things. Not all of them will take so much time. Some things are very quick that you can just simply implement. Some things will have more concepts in which I'll have to give you more examples and give you a detailed explanation. And let's go to the next one now. Now the next mistake that a lot of developers make is writing promises like this. People write promises because promise has a resolve or reject, and simply they return something and they think that this is all they have to do, but this is wrong. And let's see why. So right now we have a function get to do's, and this is returning a number 100, and we have the regular promise constructor, and in the end we expect to get a number 100 if the promise is successful. Do you think it's correct? Let's try to run this. There you go. We got undefined. So that's a problem. We did not get 100. So what did go wrong? We did not actually use the way promises are supposed to be used. We just used a return statement treating promise like a regular function, whereas it is not at all a good function. Now you can argue that I did not return something. So let's try again and see if this works now. And it still doesn't work. So we got nowhere. So now let's improve this and do the right thing. When a promise is successful, you're supposed to call the resolve function and pass the value inside it. So you don't even need to return anything. All you need to do is, when it is successful, resolve. When it is unsuccessful, call the reject and pass the error. Let's see if it works now. And there you go. We got 100. So now it works. We didn't even need to return anything from inside the promise constructor. All you have to do is pass the resolve, call the resolve function, and pass the variable or any result that you want to pass in the resolve constructor, in the resolve method, and that's it. Let's go to the next one. Pretty easy, right? The next one is, what if there was an error? And again, people make a lot of mistakes here. So instead of calling now the resolve, we'll call the reject, and in here we can pass an error, and I can create a custom error. Something failed. Let's see first of all if this works. There you go, something failed. Note, and it's saying no trace and code to show where the exception was thrown. That doesn't matter, but we are just getting an error that something failed. But this is again, the promise is failed and you are using the reject. So that is good. Kudos for you to do that. But you should actually throw a proper error message. So how you can do that in JavaScript? You can call the error constructor and pass your message inside it. And this is a much better way, and you see why. This is a better way because it will give you a stack trace, it will give you where it failed, it will also give you the lines it failed at. For example, it's saying something failed at line 6, and there you go, at line 6 we had the promise, we had the function returning, right? So it will give you more information, it will be treated as a proper error instead of just printing out a statement, because the other one was just like a console.log statement. But now it seems clear that it's an error. And the reason it is clear now to JavaScript is because we are actually passing a new error, which is the error constructor. We are using that and then passing our message. So JavaScript will consider it as a legit error, and your message will also be shown to the user. Whenever something fails in prod, you do want to see more information than just a string printed out of the console, right? At least that's what I prefer. So we have done 3 things. Let's go to thing number 4. Now, the next thing is a very simple improvement that you can add to your callback function implementation. If you have been using Node.js for long enough, I'm sure you have encountered callback in one place or the other. Yes, they are being replaced by promises and async await, but callback are the fundamental of Node.js, and you would have to use callbacks in one way or the other. So let's see what's the problem with this one. Can you guess? The problem is that you are not doing error handling. Error handling should be done by default every single time, because right now, we don't have any error. We are calling it, we're calling the callback function, but we are passing null. So right now there's no error. So things should work fine. If I run this again, you would see that 100 is printed. So that's great, right? This code should be perfect. But what if I had called the callback function and I had an error here, right? And I'm still passing the data. Now you will see that there's no error handling. There you go. We printed 100 even now. And if I comment the other line out, you will still see that the result was successfully printed. And I can also add some more strings here just to make things clear. Spellings might be incorrect, doesn't matter. There you go, it is successful, right? Now, this is not right, obviously, because we have an error and we're not really handling it. So you should make it a habit. Whenever you create a callback function, you should always write the if statement on the top, never after. You should always write this on the top. And if you have an error, you can do your error handling logic and you need to return so that you don't execute any other line. This is very important. It's up to you how you handle the error though. For now, I will just print console.log, because this is obviously not a real application. So I'll just print out the error and that is it. But at least I'm returning, right? Now, if I clear and rerun this, there you go. Now we got the error, right? Now, let's see if return was missing. If I remove the return, you will see that I do print the error, but then I say successful, which obviously doesn't make sense. It is obvious in this 10 lines of code, you can see that who would make that mistake. But believe me, I've seen mistakes like these made a lot. So you should always make it a habit to do your error handling logic on the top of every callback function. And once you do the error handling, you should always return so that the success case should never be executed. This is the best way to handle these kind of situations. So now if I run it again, we would just see the error printed out. It is not successful, it has failed, and it is clear to everyone, clear to developers and to our logs. The next one is just an extension of this one, because right now, again, we are making the same mistake. We are passing the error like this. However, we should always pass the errors using the native error constructor and pass our message inside it. So here I can write something or something's wrong, right? And now if I run this, much better, right? It is printing as an actual error, which is very useful. Trust me, when you create real world applications, these things matter a lot. And this is a typo, so let's fix that as well, because I'm a good human being. And there you go. So if you did not know any of these 5 things that we just discussed, I am so glad that now you are a better developer than you were 10 minutes ago. And let's move on to thing number 6. Now the next thing is preferring sync over async methods. For example, see this one. This is a read file sync, and a lot of developers use this. They like to use this, and the reason for that is this is easier to understand, right? And you don't have to write any asynchronous handling, you don't have to write promises, you don't have to handle async await, etc. So a lot of people go towards this. They write, instead of using the async method, which is read file, people write read file sync. Now this is not good for performance because yes, the end result is going to be same. Let's run it. So node index. So it's right now printing out the buffer. So all you have to do is write the format of your text. So UTF-8 for us. And there you go. We have a abc.txt file. And in this, I just have some text and it is being printed out on the console. So everything's working fine. People can argue that this is good, right? It is straightforward and things are being printed. But it's not that good. Instead, you should use something like this. Use the async method and write await in front. Whenever you use sync methods, you're actually blocking the loop. You're actually blocking the event loop of JavaScript, which is not good. It will slow down your functionalities. JavaScript by default is a single-threaded language and it functions in the most efficient way it can. However, if you make things synchronous, you are stopping things, you are adding things to the event loop, you are making your program slower, and it will impact performance, especially in production, especially if you have a lot of requests. So instead, what you should be doing is you should be using either async await or handling with promises or just using a simple callback. So let me try to fix it quickly with a callback. Instead of using read file sync, I'll use read file. I'll still use UTF-8, and in here, I'll use the callback. So error and response. And obviously, you could do it any way you want. So right now, I'm using a callback, so I don't really need an await, right? And over here, I'll just write console.log, and I'll just print the response. Now, I know, obviously, that this is not the best code, but at least I'm trying to make a point here, and I'm trying to improve the way that you might read files or rename files or do anything in a synchronized way where Node.js or any JavaScript framework offers you. So let's print it now, and it still works. So the only difference is that now you explicitly have to handle the asynchronous part of the code, right? And if there was an error, you would have to do something like this as well, which we just learned, right? If there's an error, you're supposed to print it like this, at least print it, right? You can do anything with it if that you want. And in the end, you also need to return. So let's see if this works. I rerun it, it still works. Now let's make the name of the file incorrect and rerun this. And there you go, it fails. However, if this was missing, the error handling would not be very graceful, and we would have printed undefined because there's no result, right? There's obviously no result, and the reason for that is you haven't handled the error, and in the end, you're trying to print what you got as a successful response, but it was not successful. Again, reiterating the last point, that error handling is so important in JavaScript, especially inside callbacks. And now if you run it again, you get a proper error with proper information for the error, right? So show us a thumbs up if you like what you see. Now let's go to thing number 7. Now let's go back to our JSON placeholder example because I have something nice to share with you, and a lot of people do make these mistakes, and these were very common before. For example, it is very common to write something like this, but instead, if this was actually a callback or a promise handling, then some people write or prefer writing something like this. For example, whatever the response they get, then they would do return response.json, and then they would write .then, and then finally they would print it out. And let me reformat this so that it's easier for you to follow. And let's just print out console.log users. So what are we doing over here is that we are first of all try to fetch something, and after we do fetch it, and I can actually remove this from the async function because it's no longer I'm no longer using async await. So I could simply write this. I'm using the fetch API, and then I'm writing .then. So when it is successful, after that I'm going inside it. I'm transforming the JSON. I'm transforming the response into JSON and finally printing it out, right? So there you go. It still works. I got the users. And I could simply print one user so that it's easier for us to follow in the console. And there you go. We got one user, Leon Graham. That's perfect. Now, what if there were some more things we wanted to fetch, right? We could say that after we get this, I want to fetch the posts by this user. So inside this, I can say users slash, and again, I do prefer using backticks. So let's replace these codes by backticks. And now I'll write, let's instead of fetching all the users, let's get user number one. I think that would make things easier for us. And here we, instead of getting all the users, we are just getting a user. And now I can write user.id, right? That's perfect. And after that, I'll write posts and just get the first post by this user. Let's just get that. Instead of printing users now, I would print user and I would print user.name. So let's first of all run this. If this is working fine, then we'll move forward. I have this habit. I always run this code. I always run my code after making small changes so that I don't have 100 lines of changes and I don't know where the code broke. So after making every change, I just rerun the code. That's just my habit. So right now we have the username and everything works and looks fine, right? Everything looks great. Now, after we have fetched the post, again, I can write .then, right? Because that's how you handle promises or callbacks. And inside this, I will write, again, my response. Once I have my response, now I need to convert this response into JSON. That is how the Node fetch API works. So what I'll do now is I'll simply say, same as before, response.json. And then once this is finally resolved, what I'm going to do is print it out. And that is all we want to do. So we should have received the post by now. So I'll say console.log and I'll just print it out by saying console.log post. Let's see if this still works. There you go. We have Leon Graham and we are trying to print a post by this user. Now it's not giving us the response, it's giving us an empty array. So that's what I'm trying to figure out what mistake did we make. I think this is just because of the documentation. I can't do users/1 and then post/1. I can get all the posts by this user. That's just how this API works. So instead of getting, so I think res would still work. And here I would be getting posts and not just a single post. But I can just print out the first one, right? We can still do that. So let's see if this works. Rest post is not defined. Obviously, I have to replace this variable. Sorry for the confusion. And there you go. We have the username and then we have the post. So everything works fine. And we can just print the title so that we have a leaner and cleaner output. So there you go. This is the user and this is the post. Perfect. Now, do you see something's wrong with it? If you actually carefully read this code, don't you see it's too ugly, really difficult to understand, and just doesn't look good. So let's make it better. Let's make it more human readable, developer readable, and cleaner and easier to debug. So we could write fetch. Let me just copy that. So we will be writing the same code, but in a much cleaner way now. And once we have the response, I can copy a few more things because I'm a little lazy. And instead of writing another nested then inside it, I would simply return it and then write .then over here. And obviously, I can still copy a few things. And again, once we do have the response, I don't need to write all of that. I can simply do this, right? So what we are doing is we are handling all the promises that we needed to handle one after the other much more gracefully, right? Whenever we return something, it can be handled with a promise. If we return a promise, it can be used with .then again and again and again, and we can write this 100 times. This is a much leaner, much cleaner code. And let's finally complete this. Once this is run, we still get the .then. There you go. And last but not the least, the post. So obviously this is much cleaner than this one, right? We have a lot less nesting now, but we could take it a step further and even remove these because all of these are single line code. So we don't really need the brackets, right? I can simply remove all of that if I don't need to print the user, right? I can take that away, take away this, take away that. There you go. Obviously becoming much cleaner. I'm starting to like it already. And again, I can remove these, I can remove this, I can remove the return statement. Finally, once I have the posts, I can do a console log, and that's it. Our huge code just converted to 5 lines of code and much cleaner, and still does the same thing in the end, right? If I comment all of this out, you will see that this piece of code is doing the same thing. It's still printing out the post, but in a much cleaner way. It is not nested. And you can imagine, what if this was, right now this is just 3 or 4 levels, right? What if this was 10 levels, 15 levels, 20 levels? You don't want to make that mistake. You don't want to fall into those traps. And this is thing number 7. Let's go to thing number 8. The next one actually can be built over this because we have written a lot of asynchronous code. We have a lot of dot then statements, but we didn't really use catch. And we should always use catch. We should always do error handling, right? Because if anything fails, we do want to see what failed. So I will just write console.error and just print out the result for now. Print out the error for now. If there is any, this is a very common mistake. People forgot to add catch in their then statements, and we should never make that mistake. It's the same thing, right? We just saw before in the callbacks how important this is. Callbacks and promises are the same thing in the end. They're just handling asynchronous code in different ways, and you always do need some kind of error handling. So now if I run this again, things work just fine. But in case things did not work fine, we do need to see the correct error. So let's make a typo in our API, and let's try to rerun this. Let's see if there's any error. And there you go. We have an error and it's saying it failed because of some reason socket hanged up. However, if there was no catch statement, let's see what happens now. It says failed to fetch, but we don't really get all the information, all the useful information that we got before. So therefore, you always need to handle the errors gracefully and always need to print out the error. At least print out the error, if not handle them more gracefully. We could even write custom errors, obviously, something failed, etc., etc. I mean, you can handle the error however you want. It will depend on your application, right? You're printing something failed, right? Or you could just do the old-fashioned way and just print out the error itself. It's up to you. But the important thing is that you should handle errors always. Let's go to thing number 9 and 10 now. They're going to be super simple, super quick. I appreciate you hanging out till the end of this video. So let's go to thing 9 and thing 10. And the final thing that we'll see today is gracefully handling async await code in JavaScript. It is very easy to use async await. It's the easiest. No one likes callbacks anymore. No one likes promises. But async await are actually a little tricky, especially when it comes to error handling. And people don't always know that. If you already know that, you are great. You are doing just great. But if you don't know that, because I didn't know that when I first learned async await. So let's quickly go over that. This is going to be the last thing, and I hope you learned something new in this video. So let's go over it quickly. It is very important to write all your async code in a try-catch block, because if you don't, you won't really be able to catch any errors. And here I can write error, and let's print out the error over here. Okay, I don't need all of this. Let's see if this works, right? If I get the users, I just want to do console.log. And instead of getting all the users, I'll just get the first user in the list, and I'll just print that user out if everything is successful. Let's see, let's print it out. There you go. We got the first user. That is just awesome. Let's just get the username. Just make things more clear. And there you go. We have the username. Perfect, 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 perfect. Now, first of all, let's see what would happen if there was no try catch. So I would comment this out for a second. I'll just use simple, and I would just create an error inside my URL just to see how it handles. So it just says fail to fetch. Again, no error handling. We haven't really printed out the proper error, no trace of error, and in logs, you will curse yourself if you do something like this, and you would be very unhappy with yourself. Now, let's see the difference in the log statement if you actually use catch error. And I'll introduce another typo in my URL, and there you go, much better. Socket hang up, we got a lot of more information now. We have all the stack trace, we have the connection was reset, we have all the information that this error should give you. So as soon as you see this, you might be able to tell, oh, am I going to this URL? Looks like there's a typo here. So let's fix that, rerun this, and there you go, you are successful again. But in the previous error, as you can see over here, it just says failed to fetch. doesn't even give you any information. And it's not their fault, it's not Node.js's fault, it's not Fetch's fault, it is your fault. So don't make that mistake again. I hope you learned something new. I hope now you will at least be following all these 10 best practices whenever you write any code. And see you next time. Thank you very much. Hit the thumbs up button, hit the like button again. We really appreciate you taking time and seeing our videos. As you can probably tell, at the start of the video, it was day. Now it's almost night. So thank you again. See you next time and have a great day.